There was a time when the people who didn't want you to listen to music were stuck up parents and Christian zealots. Nowadays, it's music magazines. About a month ago, Loudwire published an editorial that 20 years ago would have never made it into a heavy metal publication. It even opens with a trigger warning as you are asked to practice self-care when you read the article. Now, how effective it is to give a trigger warning where you explicitly say this contains, quote, sexual abuse, victim blaming, grooming, rape, and torture is up for debate. And just before we keep going, an important disclaimer. I'm a trauma survivor. At some point in my life, I dealt with some pretty horrendous things and I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. I am not saying this to suggest that you should agree with me because of this victimhood. Victims, like me, don't have a monopoly on being right, so I can be just as wrong as anybody else. I am only saying it so that you understand that when I speak about a topic like this, I am not doing it as a mere spectator. My issue isn't, think about all the poor abusers. My problem is with the authoritarian zealots, the Gen Z inquisitors that are telling you that you are a bad person for listening to music that they haven't pre-approved. This was the point made in this editorial titled "We Can't Afford to Separate the Art from the Artist," published by Loudwire. If you read this editorial, you'll see that the behaviors that the author thinks should make you stop listening to someone are, they're all over the place. Some are pretty obvious, things like the fact that Elvis and Jimmy Page allegedly had sex with underage teenage girls, or that Marilyn Manson has recently been accused of rape and torture. And if the editorial had stopped there, maybe I wouldn't have cared. I mean, it's obvious that the author has good intentions, even if her approach is to infantilize trauma survivors, but, whatever. My problem is that she also has a beef against those who have what she calls legitimately bad views. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. I mean, it is one thing to say you shouldn't listen to Tupac Shakur because he was convicted of gang rape, or don't listen to Michael Jackson because he has been credibly accused too many times of raping children. It is a whole different thing, however, when you say don't listen to music by artists whose views are not approved by my lowest common denominator magazine. I am not exaggerating when I say that this is what this editorial is about. I mean, in the same paragraph where the author mentions that you shouldn't listen to Marilyn Manson because he has been accused of grooming, abuse, and rape and torture, she says that you also shouldn't listen to Ted Nugent because he has extreme right-wing views. Now, if you follow us on Facebook or have read what I've written about Ted Nugent, you'll know that I think that the man is an imbecile, and that's putting it as nicely as I can. But I definitely wouldn't put it side by side with, raping and torturing someone. It's a false equivalence. Speech and ideas, no matter how stupid they might be, are not the same as material actions. Saying crazy, ignorant shit, as Ted Nugent regularly does, is not the same as raping and torturing a woman. And I can't believe that someone who really seems to want to portray herself as a defender of women would put those two things on the same level. And it goes even beyond that. The author claims that you are an accomplice. She says that by listening to the people that she has decided you should not listen to, you are part of the problem. You are funding the abuse. And since she doesn't care whether someone has been convicted or not, I have a hard time understanding how we are supposed to not be a part of the problem. If you go on Spotify and play a random song, should you first pause it, Google the artist, and make sure that they are in her approved list? And if she doesn't know the band and there's nothing on the internet, should we contact the friends and family of the musicians and investigate whether any accusations had ever been made against them? Not only about crimes, of course, but also about thought crimes. Maybe they voted for the wrong candidate or they supported the wrong policy. And why should we stop with music? Should we stop watching any film made by Miramax because, as producer, Harvey Weinstein is almost certainly still making money from those films? Are Pulp Fiction, The English Patient, Good Will Hunting, and Clerks now all forbidden? And that's without mentioning scummy people like Roman Polanski or Woody Allen, both of whom are talented in their own right, but they are also sexual predators. Should we give up on something like Polanski's Rosemary's Baby or The Pianist because of what a despicable person he happens to be? And that's without mentioning all the art made before the 20th century. Pick any book from before that era, and it's more likely than not that the author had views that we would absolutely hate by today's standards. After all, some of the most progressive people in 1845 would probably sound extremely conservative today. So what is the burden that is being placed on consumers of media? Do they need to sign up to a newsletter to be quickly informed of what they can or cannot listen to, or what they can or cannot read? Or what political ideas are now forbidden? And should we simply stop listening to these bad people, or should we also demand that nobody else should be allowed to listen to them either? After all, if we say that we are complicit in the abuse by listening to an accused person's music, why should we let anybody else listen to them? And this brings us to something else, the issue of accusation versus convictions. Is being accused enough to consider someone guilty? I mean, that's the case with Marilyn Manson, who hasn't been convicted of any crime and who rejects the accusations made against him. Should people stop listening to him just because he was accused? What if there is never a conviction? And what if someone is acquitted in court? After all, they were accused and that should be enough, right? That's really what the author of this editorial believes, saying that false accusations are pure mythology and that they don't actually happen. Of course, this is demonstrably false, as shown by the famous Duke University lacrosse case or the journalistic malpractice of Rolling Stone magazine's A Rape on Campus story, which featured a very serious accusation that was later revealed to be, in the words of the Washington Post, a complete crock. In other words, pure, unadulterated bullshit. The solution to the shameful history of ignoring accusations of abuse against women shouldn't be remedied with let's throw caution to the wind and accept everything at face value. Accountability is important and necessary, but so is the presumption of innocence. But let's go one step further. What if someone is convicted of a crime? They do their time, fulfill the conditions of their sentence, and want to get back to what they did before. What do we do then? This isn't a theoretical problem. Faust, the drummer of Emperor, went to prison for committing a hate crime. He murdered a homosexual man who came on to him. It was a brutal murder, and for that he went to prison for almost a decade. Now, I've never met Faust in person, so I can't say anything about him other than what I've read in the media. But I do know someone who does know him, and that's Gal, the former singer of Gorgoroth and who is a gay man himself. Gal has been very supportive of Faust's return to music and explicit in saying that he seems to be a different person who should be allowed to get on with his life. Seriously, when Gal came out, apparently it was Faust who was the first person to congratulate him for it. That shows a lot of growth for someone who was clearly a horrible bigot in his youth. But for some people, understandably, that is not good enough. They want the punishment to be eternal. And honestly, I am not going to be the one to tell someone to move on from a murder just because the perpetrator did their time. And that's the point. These are not easy questions. So when somebody writes an editorial pretending that they are indeed easy, saying that you are part of the problem for listening to whatever they reject, they are trying to get you to stop thinking and to simply obey. Now, you might be asking yourself, what is the objective of an editorial like this? Well, it's virtue signaling. It's to preemptively show that they, as a publication, are the good guys, while anyone who disagrees with them probably is a bigot. There is an episode in Joseph Heller's Catch-22 where a fictional captain starts to demand increasingly more extreme demonstrations of loyalty from the soldiers. Everybody is forced to pledge allegiance to the cause. To anyone who questioned the effectiveness of the loyalty oaths, he replies that people who really did owe allegiance to their country would be proud to pledge. The more loyalty oaths a person signed, the more loyal he was. The important thing is to keep them pledging. It doesn't matter whether they mean it or not. That's why they make little kids pledge allegiance even before they know what pledge and allegiance mean. And this is the case here. Questioning them gets you labeled a bigot, a racist, a misogynist, a fellow traveler of Nazis, or whatever idiotic response these people can come up with. For many, those accusations are enough to make them think twice about speaking their minds, and so most people simply end up submitting and playing the part of an obedient child. And we don't need to guess whether this is true or not. Just go to Loudwire right now and see how happy they are to promote the music of the same people who they would otherwise tell you not to listen to. I mean, it's all about those ad impressions, so why would they try to live up to their own idiotic standards? Now, this terribly written editorial is the proverbial canary in the coal mine. It is an indication of where we stand in the battle over free speech. Remember that free speech is not only about being able to speak, but also about being able to receive knowledge. The fact that Loudwire thought that it would be acceptable to run an editorial that openly says that you shouldn't listen to music by people who have wrong ideologies should really make us all worried. And just to avoid any doubts on this point, it's fine if you decide that you don't want to listen to a band because of their behavior or because of the things they've done. I myself do that often. There are bands that I don't listen to because I think the people involved are shit. My issue is that this is a decision for you to make and not for some liberal arts major somewhere or some pathetic bureaucrat hiding in a basement. In the end, both of them are the same kind of inquisitor obsessively trying to find blasphemies and blasphemers. And bowing to them is not something that we should ever accept. Don't give up your ability to make decisions. Be very skeptical of the people who tell you, actually, I have this whole thing figured out. You should just listen to me and read only the things I let you read. Because you know who does that? Fucking cult leaders.